So next up we have Dr. Stefano Biagini from the University of Kent. And Stefano is going to talk about strategies to improve accessibility and inclusivity in higher education. Stefano is sharing his screen already.
Right, good morning and a very good welcome to you all, wherever you are in Britain. So thank you all for participating. So my name is Stefano Biagini from the University of Kent. Before I start, in case you're not familiar with Teams, if you press the ellipsis, it will turn on the live caption so you can get subtitles when I'm talking. Ben talked about sort of good practice in a company or organisation, and I'm going to follow up on that on the subject of disability. I'm going to talk about some bespoke support as well. Talk about sort of strategies that organisations can take, not just in higher education, to improve inclusivity in the workplace. So my background is that I'm an academic, I'm a research chemist, and I've been involved in EDI activities for a number of years. And at Kent we have the OPERA team, which is designed to reduce barriers to accessibility. And this is what Ben and my colleagues are working towards. So a disability is one of the protected characteristics defined under the Equality Act, and it would be really nice to go through all the other protected characteristics, but we're going to focus on disability. So first of all, let's sort of understand where we are. How many people in this country are disabled? And the ONS gives a figure around about 22%. Now, the definition of disability is somewhat contentious. This is a useful one from the United Nations, which implies that there's a barrier between people who have or perceive to have an impairment with the rest of society. And whichever sort of interpretation of disability you look at, very often they're quite pejorative because they're focusing on what people can't do rather than what they can do. So most of us are affected by disability either directly or indirectly. We have somebody that we all know who has caring responsibilities, or somebody that we know who will have a disability. So is there a problem in society? Do we directly or indirectly discriminate against disabled people? Well, the evidence would just suggest that we do. Disabled people, the employment rate is around about 48% compared to an employment rate of 79% for non-disabled people. This graph sort of shows that whether you're whichever gender you are, your rate is around about 48% employment. And I couldn't find any data for non-binary disabled people. So if anybody does have any data, please let me know. It seems to be that all ages and stages through adulthood in the working place, disabled people are less likely to be employed, and that becomes even worse as you get older. Now, as Phil said, our slides are available on the file system, and if you right click on this slide, you will see something called format picture, and if you go to the alternative text, then you can have all of this data, in case you can't see it, in a numerical fashion. And this was easy to do because this was obtained from the Office for National Statistics, and you can access that link by right-clicking and going to open hyperlink, and their website presents it using these different formats. And that's a very good example of inclusivity. So I'm here mostly to refer to higher education. That's my background, that's my experience. If we look at students who declare a disability in higher education, it's around about 16.6%. So that's below the 22% of the UK. And I'm going to give some bespoke examples on students with visual impairments, because that's often seen as one of the most challenging impairments. So we looked at employment rates for disabled people on the whole. If we look at the engagement of visually impaired students in higher education, it would seem that at the very least their rates are 50% lower than non-disabled people. And if you're seriously visually impaired, you're 90% likely to be unemployed, to be not economically viable, and not to hold down meaningful relationships. And that is not the sort of inclusive society by any stretch of imagination, and not something I think most of us want to live on. So we want to be part of the solution. Now, it's worth remembering that not all visual impairments are the same, and adjustments that work for one person might not work for another person. And some of the visual impairments are actually caused by processing difficulties. People are familiar with dyslexia, maybe not Ireland syndrome. And here's a good example. I'm not going to steal the thunder from my next speaker talking about colour, but if you get the right tone background, it makes it easier to read, not just for people with Ireland syndrome and dyslexia, but for everybody. Readability is improved. So it's an example of having good design from the start. Contrast issues, quite often people scan images and pictures. There's 22% is hard to read and an automatic scanner wouldn't pick it up. It only takes a couple of minutes to fix that and to adjust that. So let's remember that and make the effort when we prepare our work. So Ben talked about good design from the start. He talked about the regulations, and I'm going to sort of give you a little bit more of an example about things that are not currently covered by regulations. If you are faced with this image that I put up here, which is unreadable and inaccessible, it will be a very frustrating experience. And this is what sometimes we're doing to some of our colleagues. So how can we address that? Well, Microsoft Word have made it extremely easy for anybody to do, to check for accessibility, and you can follow the instructions. It tells you how to correct the errors. One of the key things is introducing alternative text, like I showed you with the ONS image, and it will give you a score at the end to tell you that there's no issues. And at Kent, we have a complementary accessibility checker, which also checks how navigable your document is. So some of you have seen documents where if you click on the contents, it will hyperlink somewhere else on your screen, on the document. And one of the most efficient people that I know who said to me, why would you prepare documents any other way? This is just so efficient for preparing minutes and reports. PowerPoint has a similar accessibility checker. And again, I won't steal the thunder from our later speaker. I prepared training videos which are free and anybody can access on how to prepare these. So you can access it through the files on this webinar. So here's a quick memory challenge just to break up the morning. Remember these 5 objects: Neptune, boat, pebbles, mountain, cat. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now let me tell you a story about a dog that ran through a house and stole a sausage. He ran so fast that he fell into the sea and he nearly drowned, but luckily he was rescued by a sweet hummingbird. Can you remember these 5 objects? So you roughly had the same amount of time, but if you pace it and if you do it at the rate that you might write, it's easier to take on board the information. So test yourself afterwards what you can remember. Here's an example of preparing short videos, 5, 10, 12 minutes long. And included in there, you can include videos from outside sources with people from different characteristics, improve diversity as well. And the students really appreciate this and find them a lot more accessible. And you can have these as pre-lecture material, which helps with attention deficit disorder and autism, but everybody enjoys them as well. So in the physical sciences, the disability rates are even worse than the average sector. We're about 13%. And I said I was going to talk about bespoke adjustment for, say, vision impairment. Here's just one solution that we came across. It's a titration setup. I've chosen this because a lot of people will be familiar with titration. And essentially, it might be hard to see, but there are webcams which are following a reaction. And there are webcams elsewhere following a burette. And these webcams are displaying what it can see on a screen. So now a student can use what limited vision they have to press right close to the screen and observe the reaction in safety. You can do the same thing and set up webcams to read out scales and other equipment, and you can have the laboratory result and you can laboratory manual and your notebook, and you can type it in and you can blow it up in a way that it works for that individual person. So always speak to the person, as Ben said, and find out what works for them, and adjustments do not need to be expensive. So those of you that do training videos, please click on this link and see the difference between using and not using audio description. When you prepare videos, try and describe as much as you can when you do them.
You've got a minute left, Stefano.
Thank you. So you're cutting my time. Inclusive leadership means remembering that you have biases against some things. Why does it help? Our first leading strategy of live broadcast informed our transition to online teaching. This was done 3 years ago. Closed captions, the same. So think about asking your organisation to abide by certain standards. This has been adopted by staff at Kent. And it means that we create a more inclusive environment. Our work has been picked up by a special report led by Lord Blunkett. So what I really want to say, and I'm going to have to take a little bit longer, Phil, now, is that I want accessible degrees for everybody. How can we do that? If you're in higher education and you've prepared something that has been translated in sign language, share it. And if we share all of our modules and our resources, we can have a whole degree stream that's been prepared, which is less burdensome on any one institute to organise. And what that means is that we can include anybody wherever they are in the UK. So please contact me if you're interested in this. And it means that we can go to schools and say, yes, you can at that stage. These resources become eventually international and global. And it means that anybody across the world can use them. If you're doing conferences, insist on accessibility requirements. Currently, we're talking to organisations who are very, very keen to change the culture. GlaxoSmithKline, UCRI, Royal Society of Chemistry. So the culture is changing. So the message is there are benefits for all of us. Do engage and remember other people. Thank you to all my colleagues who've worked on these adjustments. Thank you. Did I make it within the 10 minutes, Phil?
You were very close, Stefano. So yeah, I think you can have a gold star anyway. That's okay. We have, I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat or the Q&A. Steve or Nick, would you like to pick a question?
I can ask a question.
Great, thanks, Nick.
Stefano, what would you say during your time working at the university and improving accessibility? What would you say has been your biggest challenge so far?
It's getting buy-in. It's getting buy-in from colleagues. It's often seen as do as I say, not do as I do. And I think that needs to change. So any manager who's watching this, they need to take it on board that they need to change your activities. And the value of doing that is you recognise some of the challenges involved in making the adjustments, but you will also see the benefits flow through your organisation if you do that. So yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge, changing. Sometimes people also think they need to be perfect. You don't, you're allowed to make mistakes, but nobody minds you making a mistake. You know, if you keep talking to the people whose adjustments you're initially making these things for, as long as you're trying, people are okay with that. You know, I've learned a lot throughout the years. I started doing things I thought they were a right way, and then I found out there are better ways. So that's okay. And don't sort of feel you have to go through your whole work. I mean, UCRI are a good example. They've looked at a website, they've taken the top 10% of what people access, and they've improved those. So that's going to address 90% of the traffic on their website. You know, just make that effort and that willingness, and the culture will change.
Cool, that's perfect. Thanks, Stefano.
Thank you, Stefano. And I would just personally like to say that having worked with Stefano for a few years now, I would just like to say well done, because he really does work hard at trying to make sure he does a lot for his students. And I think that point where he said that, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, and students do appreciate it. I've seen that firsthand with students, you know, way back when we were in the lecture theatres, and some of the things that Stefano was doing to try and improve the learning experience for his students. So yeah, I think Stefano is a bit of a trailblazer in that respect, but I think the students, they really do appreciate that. So well done, Stefano.
Thank you. It's a team. Likewise to all of you. Thank you.